Hello, 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 and welcome to my living room and my Zoom corner. I was hoping to record this outside in some picturesque setting to beat Zoe Brigley, who was your guest last month and who is also my editor for my poetry collections. But the Welsh weather said no, and it has rained and it has rained and it has rained. So instead I'm going to read from the house, and because I'm going to read you some poems from my forthcoming collection, Windfalls, which is my second collection. It's coming out through Parthian in May. And the ones I've chosen to read today are perhaps slightly more of domestic, set in the house or the garden, but also set in Cardiff. So there's some flying trampolines and some boxing and some trauma for you to look forward to as well. So I'm going to perhaps read for 15-20 minutes, probably 20 minutes, because I have a tendency to ramble on, and then I'll answer the wonderful audience questions that you sent me before. So to start off with, I'm going to read the title poem, which is Windfalls. Next door's apples now overhang the garden fence, above the sunspot where I like to sit and read in the afternoon. The boughs heavy with fruit flushed by the heat wave, dropping like flies as I watch, ignoring the piles of bills before me. I imagine sitting at the table later, being rained on by apples like small bombs. Though the tomato plants shoot taller and taller, blossoming yellow, the new flowers still wilt in the corner. Yet the patchy grass, the path, the veg beds are now drowning in windfalls, in various stages of insect feeding and decay. So I think that kind of sums up why I chose the title Windfalls for the collection. It's very much about unexpected gains and advantages, but also the fails, the falling that happens to all of us in our lifetimes. And I hadn't imagined initially that it was going to be a whole collection. I began it as an exercise to just entertain myself, because I found myself suddenly single after years of serial monogamy, and weirdly being asked out. I just found it very strange to be chatted up or asked out, and definitely wasn't in a place where I was going to take up the offers that were coming my way. So I started to write poems about what might have happened if I had, and then it became, because I kept doing it became what I thought was going to be a pamphlet called The Carnival Boyfriends. And you can read what was going to be the title poem in Poetry Wales from April last year, but also you can hear it for free. There's an audio file on the Poetry Wales website. So I wrote this series of poems about these dates that did not happen, and I'm going to read you a couple of those. So this one is the Knotweed Remover. I can sort out your problem for you. This stranger in a bar hands me a business card, winks. I wonder how he knows that, though I've not seen evidence of return. I hear it creak in the night. No, I can't have unrooted it all. Later I learn that all his unknotting by day is replaced with ropes after dark. Sometimes you have to tighten first, to loosen up. You can't always leave as clearly as you'd like, though I wake to nail marks, have tried to dig out in the gloaming. It haunts, threatens rampant regrowth. Invasive, it taunts my thoughts. Spray, injection, herbicides, stem. It won't leave quickly. He surveys the damage, my cracked tarmac, blocked drains, undermined foundations. Tries to calculate my bruising decline in value. 20%, 30%. Now knots scourge everywhere, but nobody is tying them. Gut, shoulder, all the unlabelled boxes under the stairs. It can take 3 years, so you'll have to be patient and rich. £1,500 for just a small patch of weed. A new university study claims even that is futile. There is no cure. In the house, in my bones, the creaking grows louder. Shoots appear in the garden where, wrapped in a strangle of ropes, a small voice repeats, "Untie me, untie me, untie me." And slightly cuter one now. Everyone got married. He was a cupped hand to the cigarette she'd quit, but taken up again, only to burn time like candles. She cast lines and nets, caught wishes. The glint of beaked mackerel, a silver lining to the flesh-pecked bone. Beyond their boat, stars were strung across the late sky, and bauble-eyed, they tried to drop anchor. So I'm going to read 2 really long ones now, so I'm going to have a sip of my squash. Both based in Cardiff. This one is appropriate to the weather that we are having in Cardiff at the weekend. It's called "I've Been Wanting to Write to You About the Trampolines." I've been wanting to write to you about the trampolines, but somehow I keep getting distracted by thoughts of the flood, the way the trees in Butte Park were like bathers waving or drowning, bare arms and high winds, how the walking dogs were confused at the new pond extensions, their now swamped paths. I've been wanting to write to ask if you've seen them, airborne, bouncing as far as we'd once dreamt we could. Remember when we practiced and practiced, sometimes for so long and so high and so laughy that we wet ourselves just a little but never said. All that mattered then was the height, the leap away from land, from everything. And so, when I saw the wrecked ground as the waters ebbed, though I felt the devastation of those flooded homes, of everything lost. My first thought was how I wished I could reach you to tell you about those flyaway trampolines, stopping trains in their tracks, causing the chaos we'd wanted, stopping the world so that we could show off our balance, our sailing grace, our flight. And I promised you a boxing poem, so you get this one. I wrote this on the night of what was meant to be an Anthony Joshua fight, and the title is from the banter from before his fight, but in the end it wasn't. It turned out to be a different fight, but I still love the title, so I've kept it. In this battle, there won't be many hugs. It is the night I step out of Central Station to a sense of unboxed violence. The night the usual taxi rank on shutdown forces me to cross to an unlicensed car. It is the night my driver's door opens at the traffic jam junction. The stalled red lights, the click as the door in front unlocks, his sudden lunge forward, the fast words, a swung fist at the other driver caught cold, and I watch, screens separated inside the taxi, until my driver reclaims his seat, slams his door. The lights flash, amber, green. And as he leaves, my brain catches up with my eyes. I think, red! Say stop. Pull over. I want you to pull over now. I begin my 8 count. 1, 2, 3, 4. He finally knocks out the engine at a patch of scrub by the prison. As I unbelt, he heavyweights my belongings from the boot, punches my phone from my hand to blur attempted mugshots, is out of sight by the time I am upright, alone, seeking. Number plate, car make, details. My next move. So we're going to return to the garden now after that. But there's still a little boxing involved. This one was commended in the Pro Laureate competition, and it's not been published anywhere, so it's the first time I've shared it. It's called Wildflowers. Now, when we come together, we splinter bones. Our mirrored images, our mirrored injuries bloom across our feet as we find weight too hard to bear. Outside, September rays have willed one surviving sunflower tall, a spike of petals unfurls. 2 magpies chatter amongst the apples still clinging to the tree. The lawn I've given up on burgeons pink with wild strawberries, yellow with dandelion, like ripped knickers strewn beneath the unseasonable laundry strung out to dry. Inside, he watches the boxing to distract from his pain, waiting for petals to break through his skin. So this next one is published by one of my favourite websites, Ink, Sweat and Tears, who have published a number of my poems, and I really appreciate their support. This one they published last year, and it's called Nude Smoking in the Doorway. Ben would probably like me to say that he doesn't smoke anymore, but he did then. Nude smoking in the doorway. He stands or leans against the doorframe. Light spills around him, haloing as he moons me. The husband inhales smoke, exhales smoke, takes deep breaths, surveys his terraced territory, newly cut trees, soil, awaiting seeding. Nude reclined, I watch these in-between hours, neither bed nor morning we reject time. Make our own routines, days and nights punctuated by this, the flare of a lighter, the nude smoking in the kitchen doorway, the taking of deep breaths, surveying. So for many different reasons we delayed our honeymoon, and we had so many different plans for it, but then the pandemic obviously came along and we had further reasons to delay. So I wrote this for the Right Where We Are Now project, which is Carol and Duffy's pet project for Manchester University. It's called the Cancelled Hanumi. We dream of azure, and so I paint our rented gardens rotting, shed doors, the table, summer sky blue, and make Greek salad. We sit al fresco, and although it isn't the same, there is a heat wave. It is closer than we'd hoped we'd get. Each day I tweet our hashtag fake honeymoon, hashtag Corfu, swimming, mountain hiking, olive groves, boat trips, the high-speed hydrofoil to Albania, the waiter whose eye I caught, smashed plates, while we sofa sit and listen to the news. Refund pending as the rain buckets. My husband researches fresh destinations. Cuba perhaps, now unlikely. Other Greek islands, more possible. I lose track of my furloughed days. He tires on nights as a key worker. Our plans for May involved more cocktails, more nudity, not this endless scrolling, this disappointment as we clink Retsina, TripAdvise, better times. Okay, so the last two now. This one also involves Retsina. And was written when we managed to escape to a remote place. It's called The Red Moon. I wake to blood in my mouth and spit out hazy panic. Two slug-like clots cupped dark in my hand. This may happen, the small print had said. Once or twice is okay. More and you should seek medical attention. This is the first time. At the sink I discard, rinse fingers and gums and move to the balcony for air. I tiptoe, although my husband snores, is not easily disturbed from sleep. I pour a glass of Retsina from the half-empty bottle abandoned earlier and watch the sturgeon moon set, red melting into the sea down the hill from our room. A town otherwise in darkness, quiet. I think it is the first time I have seen the moon set, this burst of loud colour burning in the stillness. Okay, so the last one. This week would have been, it's exactly a year since my last paid poetry gig on a stage with real people in Cardigan at the wonderful Cellar Bards, in a slightly different location but a gorgeous bar, with Kitty Beltry as my shared guest. And we also were blessed with having a couple of days to stay in West Wales before everything happened. And I missed that, and I miss gigs, and so this one is like a sweeter, slightly more twee poem, but because of that I'm going to read it. So it's called Car Wheels on a Gravel Road, after Lucinda Williams, after her song of the same name. And this is it. Car Wheels on a Gravel Road. We are in the car, Gibson on the back seat, clutched with our stage hats and dusty bags, as we take a ride through the Mizzle, along the A470. Waterfalls and jaw-drop views fly by, familiar yet still favourites. We know this road. And I lean back, my cowboy boot-shod feet up on the dashboard, the city dirt crying behind us. Loretta's singing on the stereo, Waylon Jennings and John Prine too, as we gallop towards mountains. A first pint, the next gig, got folks in Lanny, we're gonna meet. Okay, so now I have 5 questions. I'm going to cheat slightly on this, but yeah, I will try my best to answer them for you. So the first question: how would you describe your writing process? I've written in my notes shambolic. I think before lockdown I was perhaps more disciplined, perhaps I had less time out gigging, out seeing friends. I spent more time with my day off that was not my day off, it was my writing day, writing. But in lockdown the days have blurred, especially at the start, because Ben was working 65-hour weeks, mostly nights, and then asleep in the day, and that was my only company really. So everything started to blur and work started to blur, and it didn't really matter too much, apart from meetings, what days I did things. So I found they're like turning up on a Friday and going, okay, you're going to do these writing exercises, or you're going to look at these poems, or you're going to read this book. Didn't really happen. So ordinarily I'd say turn up at the desk and make something happen, whatever it is, whether you read or write some of the exercises you've noted or printed out, or you go back to some poems that have been troubling you. But I had 3 months of furlough at the very start of the pandemic, which was a very stressful time, and I'd hoped that I would write a lot in that time, and actually I wrote hardly anything. And then just a couple of weekends ago I wrote 12 poems in 36 hours. So yeah, I don't have a steady writing process at all. Even when I do try and have one, I still always have those kind of periods where I'll write lots of poems or stories very quickly in a very short period. And it's happened on both of my poetry collections that I've written that way in short bursts towards the end. And usually the poems that I write at the end are the hardest ones. They're the ones that I've been carrying around in my subconscious, and that I'm scared about sharing. And I'm lucky that I have an editor that makes me be brave, and tells me to tell those stories, so I do. But it's usually the poems that scare me that are the ones that come out at the end. So no, I don't have rituals. I don't light candles or put on a particular song and know that I'm going to sit down and write a perfect thing. That's just not how I work. But I do try and make the effort to make time for my writing and make it important in a way that I didn't used to do in my 20s, for sure. And ordinarily before the pandemic, I would have, I worked part-time so that I would have that day a week, so I'd have my Friday to write. So I think that is important. I think it's important to try and make some time or space for yourself. I used to go to a cafe, which is impossible obviously now, to make that separate space for my writing life, from my work writing life, and editing life. But yeah, no, I don't have a specific process. And also a lot of it comes from, I write in the bath a lot. I write with water. It has to be the right type of rain. I won't go out in a downpour, but if it's just like not going to soak me, then that's about perfect for me to go for a stomp about and try and work out a project. And I also write a lot while cooking. I like cooking soup and writing, working out projects, washing up, gardening, all those things that are sort of tactile, that don't involve your brain. And I know I'm not alone in that with writers. Okay, so how do I edit my work? Well, I've been editing at Parthian for almost 15 years, and before that editing in different projects and journalism. So I used to just write a poem and not edit it at all. It would just fall out. Sometimes I would dream one even, which is a rarity, but does happen and still happens occasionally. I'll just wake up with the poem and have to scribble it down. But most of the time it's something that I have a subject, or I'll have a couple of lines, or I might have the first line and the last line, and I'll carry it around with me for a long time. And at some point it decides it's ready, it's cooked, and it wants me to write it down. I think my subconscious does a hell of a lot of work there. I know there are other writers that dream most of their work. I only dream a tiny amount, a tiny fragment, but that influences it too. But mostly it's themes. All of my books have had themes, so if I know there are gaps in it, I'll try and fill them, and I will scour the news and scour my past experiences, trying to fit stuff in, and then walk that about until I've found the poems, I guess. But yeah, I never used to edit my work at all, but now I find I'm on like 9, 13, 15, 20 versions of a poem before I'm even sharing it with my workshop groups, with my peers, and that's before I'm even sharing it with my editor. So yeah, I refine a lot now. I hope it's visible in what I'm writing, but we'll see. You can judge that. What book or author has helped to inspire or influence your work? I'm going to cheat slightly here and combine this with the next question. What are you currently reading? because there isn't one specific book or author that has influenced my work. I'm constantly influenced. Ordinarily, I'm influenced by travel, by music, by place and people, by the things I eavesdrop on in cafes and on public transport, by the snippets I hear on the radio when trying to tune into something that will register, will play when we're in West Wales, Mid Wales, out of the usual signals because of the mountains. It really, it can be anything. TV storylines, especially now. I'm watching so much more TV than I usually would, but still not as much as most people are, I think. But I'm binge watching Netflix series, the best HBO series, and also like the reassuring programs that I've watched since I was a kid. Like Casualty, because that's so reassuring, seeing people cut open bodies, and EastEnders, because that is always reassuring, because everybody's lot is worse than yours. But in terms of what I have been reading lately, these are the books that I have really enjoyed. I'm reading a lot of first and second collections, which feeds in, I guess, to my work as poetry editor at Parthian as well. Magnolia is perhaps my favourite book of the last couple of months that I've read. I just keep returning to it. I've been looking at praise poetry, about the shape of poetry on the page. I can do form and I do understand form, but it's not my natural place to go when I'm writing. I prefer free form. But I do like to write in couplets or terza rima or some sort of structure, some tidiness on the page, and it's been making me re-examine what I can do, I guess, with white space and text. So I've really enjoyed Magnolia and I really recommend it. It's definitely my favourite poem of the last 3 months. Mary Jean Chan, I've really enjoyed this collection as well, and she read this week or last week, I'm completely losing track of days, but I really enjoyed her reading as well, but I highly recommend it. And I don't know, my poetry collection seems to have so many boxing poems, and this has so many fencing poems in it that it just really appeals. I've been returning to some books as well. I really keep returning to Shine Darling, which is a Poetry Book Society recommendation. And I first read Ella, I think it must have been in the Poetry Review. She had a poem called Fucking in Cornwall. Is that what it's actually called? It's about fucking in Cornwall anyway. And having grown up in Cornwall, it just kind of resonated. But I really loved the rest of the collection, and the cover, actually. So I've been going back to that. I've been thinking about heritage a lot, my heritage, my gypsy heritage, my Cornish heritage. So I read The Stopping Places, non-fiction. I read Bloodlines, which is a pamphlet that's out through Seren at the moment, and also Fury by David Morley, which I really loved it, but it made me cross that he beat me to writing the best poem about Tyson Fury. I would have liked to have written that in this collection, but he beat me to it. I've also been revisiting the work of Kim Adenizio, who I was really excited to see her read along with one of the poets who I edit and is also a good friend, and you will all know very well at Cardiff Met, Christina Thatcher. They read together as part of a Cheltenham Poetry Festival event, and well, I really love this Blood Axe selected collection of her poetry, Wild Nights, but I've also been revisiting her essays, mainly because I've been missing life on the road, and also because I'm finding non-fiction easier to digest, I guess, outside of work. But in her Bukowski in a Sundress collection of essays and creative non-fiction, she talks a lot about well, all sorts of things and dark things of family. But in one of the essays that really chimed with me, she is talking about, it's called Pants on Fire, and it talks about lying in your poetry and why it's okay. And it's something that I do a lot, and it's something that I think if you're tarred, as she says, as a confessional poet, that it's expected that everything you say is very true, in a way that if you're writing fiction it isn't, or if you took the I narrator out it isn't. And I've been really intrigued by that, and by that, the way that people frame the work that you do, because a lot of the work I write isn't true, and a lot of the work I write isn't about myself, but because I use I a lot, it is assumed that it is. So yeah, I'm really interested in her take on that, but also just reading these brilliant tales of hedonism and fun on the road, and just chaos on the road too, and the great poetry that comes from it. So I've been enjoying that. It's a kind of holiday from home, I guess. And then finally, I've got some other books here, but I'm not going to go through all of them. So finally, I'm going to read this next. It's called Thin Places, and it's a mostly Derry-based memoir that's a mix of memoir and nature, and was sent to me by a friend. It's called Thin Places, and it's my reward for having finished off a few big projects this month, and I've got a day off tomorrow, so I'm hoping I'm going to get to read it then. So, but I've read the prologue and I've really loved it, so I recommend it. Finally then, what advice do you have for current creative writing students? It's usually quite short and sweet, this, so I'll give you the short and sweet answer, and then I'll give you the slightly longer one. But read widely. Never stop reading. Never think you can write if you're not reading. I just really can't stand writers who think that they can write if they're not reading widely, if they're not reading every week. You really need to keep your hand in there, and you really need to be paying attention to what the scene is. You don't have to be a hipster, you don't have to write to fit, but you should be aware of the world that you work within. And yeah, so read first. And the second thing is turn up. Sit at your desk. Turn up, sit at your desk. Give yourself however many hours or minutes you can spare, and write or don't write. Write about how you can't write. Set yourself a writing exercise every day, or revisit some old drafts and try and rework them, whatever it is. But make sure you try and do something that is writing based for every day that you've set those rules to. So whether it's every Sunday morning, or whether it's every 5 a.m. before the kids get up, or whatever you set yourself, just even if it's 15 minutes, 5 minutes, it doesn't matter, but try and get into a routine of that, and turning up at the desk, sitting down at the desk, I think is the most important thing. And I'm saying that having completely said that in my writing routine I don't do that at the moment, so I understand that's impossible. But if you're asking my advice for a longer period, then that's what I would say. At the moment, I would say try and read. Try and do an exercise sometimes. Try and walk. Try and go and experience something different. Try and learn something on YouTube. Try and just have some new experiences despite the fact that you can't leave your city or your family or whatever it is that you're tied to in these circumstances, and hopefully your horizons and your opportunities will broaden later. So that's my advice. Read, write, sit at your desk. Good luck, and thank you very much for listening.